We're here to make a new type of news.
New insights, new styles, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation.
Making news just for you. It's October 11th here in Seoul. I'm Xinhyun, and you're watching News Generation, where we discuss the latest issues concerning our generation. Joining me in the studio is Kim Xiang.
Good morning, Yan.
Good morning. And Choi Ji-hee.
Good morning, Anne.
Now, both are here to speak on behalf of people in their 20s and 30s and share their own insights. Let's start with our news feed, which covers different hashtags and news items that have been trending on social media over the past 24 hours. Now, this Monday was Hangul Day, a national holiday dedicated to celebrating the invention of the Korean alphabet. It's tradition to hang Korean flags, also known as taegukgi, up on the streets to celebrate the day. Instead of doing that, one person decided to burn the flag and post it on social media, claiming that they couldn't stand Korea, seemingly fostering anti-Japanese sentiment. Police have since been trying to track down the author of the post using their IP address, and the current law penalizes anyone who damages or forcibly removes the taegukgi. And moving on to news in China, Beijing is seeing one of the most severe job crises in history. As of June last year, 1 out of 5 Chinese people aged 16 to 24 didn't have a job. This has pushed a lot of youngsters to try out live commerce broadcasts, especially since the pandemic, when many stayed at home with their phones, leading to a surge in demand. But a recent report from the China Performing Industry Association found that while the number of live commerce broadcasters reached 150 million, the majority earned less than $830 per month. And after Hamas's attack on Israel on Saturday, the militant group dragged more than 100 Israeli hostages to Gaza and threatened to execute them. They haven't specifically pointed at how many are held in captivity. Media outlets believe that some foreigners are a part of those held hostage. Now, Hamas said they would execute one civilian hostage every single time Israel launches an airstrike on Gaza without warning. And it's not the first time we've seen a highly flared hostage situation like this between Israel and Hamas, though. Back in 2011, Israel released more than 1,000 Palestinian prisoners in return for one Israeli soldier who had been held hostage for 5 years. And a similar exchange happened in 2006. So many believe this time around as well, Israel will have to do a similar deal in order to secure the hostages' release. Meanwhile, we're seeing graphic videos on social media with innocent civilians, most who seem to be in our age group, getting dragged onto vehicles and being beaten on the way to Gaza. Now, here in the studio, Chi-hee, have you ever seen these graphic videos capturing the situation over in Israel?
Well, I've read an article on how these sort of videos are going viral online. However, I haven't seen any of them myself because I'm the type of person who gets emotionally affected easily. So at these unstable times, I try not to expose myself too much to these explicit content while remaining alert and aware of the whole situation. I mean, remember back when our country faced that Halloween tragedy? I woke up the next morning not knowing what had happened the night before, and I stumbled upon this explicit video, and it really remained in my head for quite a while. So I was very miserable and depressed for quite some time. So I try not to look at these content too much while staying alert, like I said.
Right, it's very difficult to be seeing raw footage of what's happening there because none of them are really censored that well, and it really resonates with you for a long time. But I do understand that many family members are desperate to be looking at these videos and seeing if their loved ones are there. Have you ever come across these videos?
Of course, yeah. I mean, as a journalist as well, I've seen all possible videos about the situation in Israel. And I've also spoken to many of my friends, both Israeli living in areas of conflict and Palestinian by blood. Now, this tragic situation began with the hostile militant group Hamas launching a surprise missile attack into Israel, as well as murdering and abducting many innocent Israeli civilians at the Supernova Festival and from kibbutz near the Gaza Strip. However, such a large-scale attack, surprise attack, is a highly secret mission that would have come as a shock to the people of Palestine as well. Now that the IDF, the Israeli army, is rightfully launching a full-scale retaliation into the Gaza Strip, thousands more lives are expected to be lost. As justified as it is, regardless of the cause, the sacrifice of innocent civilian lives must be avoided at all costs.
Right, and the situation, it doesn't seem to be getting tamed anytime soon, so we'll have to see any further developments. Until then, that was our news feed for this Wednesday, that is. Let's jump into our main discussion topic of the day now. A common topic of interest among our generation is finding the right job, and that means a lot of things. Not just discovering what you're the best at or seeing what your interests are, it also has to do with finding what type of people you're the most compatible within the workplace. There's so many memes on social media these days where people complain about their bosses or coworkers. That's how important working with the right people is in order to boost your satisfaction at work. This doesn't seem to be that easy, though. As a matter of fact, a survey conducted by Deloitte on some 23,000 millennials and Gen Z this year found that 6 out of 10 Gen Z felt some type of microaggression at work. Around half of millennials surveyed said they've experienced this too. Of the top 3 ways they felt this microaggression, 2 included conflicts with their superiors. Because we're seeing a lot of young people, especially new or young employees, struggle to get along with their boss at the workplace, the so-called choose your own boss policy has garnered much attention online. So Chi, could you tell us a little bit more about this policy and where it exactly has been implemented?
Sure. So, well, a Japanese company first implemented this very unique policy.
Okay.
It's called the choose your own boss policy, which enables its employees to literally choose their own boss to work with. Now, the company specializes in structural design, and it has around 100 design staffs. And back in 2019, they implemented this boss selection system, and they have a division of 6 different groups or departments in their company. And according to this system that they implemented years ago, employees are able to choose their own boss out of the 6 selections or options they have every year.
Okay.
And in order to choose their own boss, they refer to this 50-page long manual that they have.
Wow, that's really long.
It is. It's called the Boss Utilization Manual. And they refer to it to choose the boss that they want to work with for that whole entire year. And according to the system, so far, 2 bosses have been rejected by their employees and moved to other departments.
Oh, so it is a fascinating policy,
is.
but I'm curious as to whether it's really effective.
At least they didn't get let go, you know, at least they kept their jobs. I mean, the policy came into action, as Chi said, when one employee actually in the same Sapporo, a Japan-based company, quit based on the reason that this employee cannot get along with the senior team member. When this policy was implemented, however, it actually lowered the rate of employees leaving the company from around 11% down to 5%. It also boosted the revenue by up to 26% as well. So we see some positive outcomes from the implementation of this policy as well.
Right, and I'm wondering how young people in Korea would be reacting if a similar policy were to be implemented here. So first off, what do you think about it, Xiong, and how does the Korean public react?
I mean, personal experience as well. I mean, Korea also has a very long-standing tradition of a very hierarchical and abusive work culture, which is one of the identifying features of the employment market here. So although it has been improving as time passed, such culture is still prevalent in many sectors, especially small to medium enterprises and a number of large companies as well. So when Koreans were asked the question whether they agree with the choose your own boss policy being implemented, majority responded positively. Let's have a look at the screen. According to a survey by Incruit on a sample size of 767 participants, 86% of all age groups responded that the choose your own boss policy will be positive, whereas 87.2% of millennials and Gen Zs agree to this policy as well. Now, if we move on to the next slide, looking at the reasons why, 22.8% chose less workplace abuse, followed by the promotion of a more horizontal work culture at 19.7% and an increase in work efficiency at 18.8%. I mean, as you asked, I do wholeheartedly agree with this. I mean, of course, we might have a number of the oddball Gen Zs as newbies joining the company, which might hinder the credibility of their boss choices.
Right.
You know, they might be doing it on purpose or just personal vengeance, who knows. But from my experience, there's nothing worse than an incompetent senior management for the company's operation.
I see.
So as long as you can actually ensure that the boss itself, the senior management, is doing a good job the company will actually benefit from this policy.
If you work with a good boss, like better productivity.
100%.
Now, what about you, Ji? Where do you stand?
Well, as Xiyoung explained, the majority of the younger generation are positive towards this unique policy because often the trouble at workplaces come from working with their bosses or
Yes.
colleagues. But then some argue that it could in fact deteriorate the divisive corporate culture, this whole system, because some argue that it's not reasonable or even inappropriate to choose your team leader or boss based on their social popularity, because it could be very rare for them to choose based on the actual standards or criteria. They would want to work with someone they're close to or who are socially
Sure.
more popular, for instance. So there are some people who are arguing against the whole
Right,
system.
just because they don't want it to be like a popularity vote. It
Exactly.
should be based on actual skill sets. And speaking of skill sets, I want to find out what type of boss you guys would rather work with. So I
Okay.
have a would you rather game, and I'm going to
Right.
give you two options to choose from. And the first question is, would you rather work with someone who's really warm-hearted and generous, but isn't the best at the job, or a boss who's really skilled at the workplace, but doesn't have the best personality traits from your side?
For me, definitely the latter.
Okay, why?
I mean, if I wanted to hang out with someone who's generous and warm-hearted, I'll probably do it in my own time. In a workplace, you're there for work, and as soon as you look for comfort at work, I mean, in my opinion, you do become an unreliable asset to your team and the company.
Right.
You know, you'll be lounging around, seeing which is the most comforting situation, how you can get off from doing less
Yeah.
work, you know, just hanging out with
Right.
the co-workers and things like that, which will not be a good outcome.
Okay, so Xiyoung chose the latter option. What about you, Jihee?
I wish I had a different opinion, but I have the same opinion,
Okay.
and I agree with
Very
Xiyoung because
responsible.
yes, when it comes to choosing my boss, I would want someone who has better skill sets rather than personality, because I would expect a boss to be able to guide me throughout my work, and I want to be able to learn
Exactly,
from
yeah.
them as well. But when it comes to choosing my colleagues, though, I would want better personality people than people with exceptional work
Skill
skills.
sets, yeah.
Because as colleagues, we can support each other, you know,
Yeah.
teach each other, and we can learn and grow together.
Yeah.
So I think it's a different story.
I mean,
between-
the perfect scenario would be a really warm boss with great skill sets.
Exactly, yeah.
But that
very
always,
rare, but I
know.
guess that's some of the bosses we have.
Okay, hopefully, yeah. Now, would you rather work with a boss that loves gathering the team together and frequently buys meals for you and your teammates, but requires you to spend time outside of your work, like personal time? Or would you rather a boss that never calls you, doesn't really care about your birthday or like your personal life, but never calls
You'd
for
get
these?
really upset if nobody remembers your birthday.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's what I would answer as well. But a boss that never calls you past work hours or hardly knows anything about your personal work life. Which one
Yeah, I
would you
mean,
prefer?
so now ideally speaking, as you just mentioned as part of the answer for the previous
Yes.
question, if the boss who is called during work hours, but they do very good work at his or her job station and also turns generous and warm-hearted afterwards and loves to boost the team spirit through company meals and drinks, that would actually be a match made in heaven. You know?
Yeah, it
Bit of
would.
both, private and public workspaces as well. I mean, however, it is quite commonplace in Korea for your bosses or senior management in Korea to not know anything personal about you. You know, with the current Gen Zs, it is actually thought to be quite a courteous thing to do for the bosses to not really ask any questions about your personal life and stay away from it as much as possible.
Right.
And when I worked in offices before, companies before, it was the case, and I really had to put more personal work in to make them get, personally acquainted, know things about them as well.
Right, and I asked this question because we had an episode where we talked
Exactly.
about millennials and Gen Z not really liking company get-togethers, but where do you stand on that?
Well, like you said, most millennials, as we deep dived into the topic in our previous episode, most of them believe that individual time is more important. But then I have my own reasons to prefer bosses who would prefer to buy meals outside of the office time, because if we are having more meals outside the office,
Yeah.
we can create better bonds, and that means we can talk about work more comfortably. And even if we are not able to make it for that team event, we can comfortably tell the boss or your colleagues more easily because of that personal bond that you've built
Right.
amongst each other.
And ladies and gentlemen, that's why we have a young, successful career woman, Jihee, who's made it up the ladder very quickly as well. Getting acquainted with the boss's personal relationships.
Spending time outside of work for those company get-togethers. But anyways, we asked our viewers to answer a very similar question. We asked them to list a few traits they would like to see in their boss, or if they're at a senior level position, what they're looking for in their employees or subordinates. Here's what 3 of them had to say. Take a look at the screen to find out. Hannah said top-tier supervisors are always open to their team's ideas and suggestions. In employees, I value problem-solving abilities and a strong sense of responsibility. SM1354 said empathy is a skill that isn't recruited for, but is essential to keep employees happy. Tiers Bell said my preferred boss would be a person who understands the needs of their employees and recognizes that we are humans, not machines, which is also great points. Now we're going to include an expert in our talks to see what he has to say on our discussion topic. We'll include him in our talks right after this. We're going to include an expert in our talks now. It's Dr. Marlon Twyman, Assistant Professor of Communication at the University of Southern California, who will be providing his own analysis as to what causes conflicts in the workplace and whether this choose your own boss policy is the best way to go. So welcome, Dr. Twyman.
Welcome back.
Thanks for having me back. It's great to join the convo.
All right, the first question I'd like to ask is the root of the problem. What would you say is the main reason why young employees, or new employees that is, and superiors or senior employers have conflicts at the workplace?
So it's hard to say for the main reason, but I would actually say there are a couple things that immediately come to mind. One has to do with the difference in training. So as we all know, as the world has progressed, the fields have gotten more complicated, more advanced, task work has gotten more complex. The kind of training you're expected to have when you enter into an organization now is just different than those who have been there for a while. And that can lead to just differences of opinions, views on how work and how specific tasks could be done. The next actually dovetails nicely to the conversation that you all were just having about working with people who may be more or less skilled than you. So how do you communicate with people who maybe don't quite understand your specific task work, but it affects their work, right? It affects their activities. How can you bridge misunderstandings when you may not necessarily use the same vocabulary? And so there's a number of things that, again, are even just like task focused that can lead to conflict. And I would say that's not necessarily a bad thing. And that's before we even broach into, interpersonal personality issues and negative behaviors at work.
Right.
Exactly. I mean, it almost sounds like a natural process to be happening where you see a generation change. And Dr. Twyman, we've been actually, for us, we represent a lot of the Millennials and Gen Z's point of view, and we've been doing that as employees' point of view as well. But could you talk to us more from an employer or a superior's point of view? What type of junior or employees do bosses actually want to work with?
Absolutely. So what I see a lot in my profession, we have the opportunity to work with many early stage people right before they go into their dream jobs in a lot of cases.
Right.
And I would say 2 things that we really not struggle with, but things that we have to end up coaching are, one, whether or not we want to have a culture or climate that's centered around task execution versus one that may be centered around more collaborative developmental work. And let me explain each one very briefly. When we're talking about task execution, we need to help newer, younger employees really learn how to hit deadlines, how to commit, and really just like work to accomplish and complete something. Now, the learning outcomes associated there may be limited. They may already have the skills they need. They may have already done this work before, but task execution helps these people be prepared to just go to work. The other one, with the more collaborative learning kind of environment, more generative, I would say, that helps people really get in a mindset, I would say, of more growth oriented, because no one really wants to stay in the same role forever with that being like the first thing you try, right? So
Right.
of course, mid-career, you really have figured out, I like a little bit more management, but mostly like task kind of work, or I like dealing with people. We figure that out over time. And so I think for the newer employees, being in environments that are collaborative, give you space to contribute, test your boundaries, explore, really build your skill set, can serve a lot of people.
Well, Professor, is there any real-life episode where a company implemented a policy to alleviate this conflict between supervisor and subordinate? And also, very briefly, are you for or against this particular choose your own boss policy?
That's a good question.
I'm against it, 100% against it. Well, the reason why, all joking, I've done a lot of research on the idea of self-managing teams or self-assembling teams where people have agency and they can control who they're working with. And one big assumption that we're making here is that people know what's good for them today as well as what will be good for them a decade from now. And so I definitely do respect the benefits that Choose Your Own Boss brings, particularly when we're talking about organizations that have unhealthy climates or cultures for a lot of their employees. However, there could be something to be said about learning how to work with different types of people and also being able to work in other conditions that may not necessarily have been something you prepared for or trained for, and being able to adapt. And so that's where my response is really rooted. I think in your early career, we have not yet been exposed to the plethora of management styles nor
Right.
working kind of conditions. And so what I think is good for me today may be true, but it may leave me very ill prepared for a promotion or for my
Right.
next organization. And so again, just taking that growth mindset, that learning mindset, I would say adapt, understand where you are. And unfortunately, that's not always going to be positive. And I'm not saying stick in
Yeah.
conditions or environments that don't work, but treat it as a learning experience and
For
then figure
sure.
out next strategy.
Right, Dr. Twyman, as you mentioned, I think it is very important for us to understand that there is always that bigger picture. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to have you on our show today.
Thank you all for the
Thank you, Dr.
conversation.
Twyman.
Thank
For one that.
All right, and before I let you guys go, could you guys give me any suggestions as we Millennials and Gen Z employees can make at the workplace to avoid or prevent any work-related conflicts from coming forth?
Yeah, I mean, as we like to say in Korea, everything is case by case. You know, it's not always the senior staff member who causes the issues, and there must be a set of rules and guidelines upheld by the management, as Dr. Twyman said. So there is at least a basic level of order in workplaces. And I think that is why a lot of Korean workplaces these days try to keep a minimal, almost impersonal relationship with co-workers unless you really get along with them. I mean, if this is going to continue, I think policies such as flexible work hours or freedom to work out of office could be a good idea. And I do actually agree with Dr. Twyman saying that choose your own boss policy would be a bad idea because it destroys an organization. It really makes sure that everybody wants to do whatever they want to do.
Right.
And you know, you never know, case by case, I said, you never know if it's going to be a positive impact or a negative one. So I mean, whilst doing these policies, flexible work hours, out of work office working things, it will make sure that mandatory schedules, everybody shows up and has the employees actually have complete responsibility.
Right, Chihi, where do you stand?
Listen to the working level, who's mostly Millennials and Gen Z, to improve productivity and work satisfaction.
That's very good. All right, and we'll be here every day from 9:30 to 10 a.m. Korea time, bringing you more topics young people are talking about. Special thanks to Kim Xiang
My pleasure.
and Chihi.
Thank you.
All right, and thank you everyone for watching. We'll see you tomorrow. We are
New Generation.
네가 너무